A lot of my Anthurium are due for a repotting. As you can see here, I have a little collection going. And I thought while I was doing this repotting video, I would share like the top care tips that you need to know to help make your Anthurium thrive, because I think these can have a reputation for being tricky, but they're really not. They're quite simple and can be very low maintenance as long as you just know a few key things. Anthurium are native to Central and South America, and they're in the aroid family. So just like Monstera and Philodendron. Most people know of Anthurium from the really vibrant, flowery, waxy bloom Anthuriums that we see at our local grocery stores or any of the plant nurseries. There are actually two main types of Anthurium. First, you have your flowering varieties, which are the ones that we most commonly see. I have an example here, and the flowering kinds are called Anthurium adrianum. This is actually a chocolate or black beauty Anthurium, which is one of the more uncommon ones that you can find of those varieties. And this one, instead of having pink or yellow or white, it has a really dark brown, chocolatey type of bloom. And then also the leaves, when they first come out, they have this like red chocolatey color to them, hence why they're called chocolate or black beauty. So this was a really cool find. Then you have your other Anthurium. These would be your foliage types, like the Anthurium clarinervium or the Anthurium crystallinum. Really all the other ones I have here. This is an Anthurium veitchii. We also call this the ab plant because it looks like it gets abs as the leaf gets bigger and bigger. Then this one is actually a hybrid of two different types of Anthurium. Isn't she beautiful? This is a hybrid of a luxurians and radicans. And look at that newest leaf. Oh, she's a beauty. So I'm really looking forward to getting in there and repotting these today. This Houseplant Care 101 series is sponsored by RepotMe.com. With RepotMe, you can have all of your houseplant supplies delivered right to your door. They are a one-stop shop for all of your houseplant, orchid, or succulent needs. They have custom handmade houseplant soils ranging from tropical houseplants, cactus and succulents, pothos, snake plants, and more. I cannot live without their clear slotted orchid pots. They have amazing houseplant fertilizers and so much more. I've included their link in my description below, and you can get 10% off any soil with my code Ashley. So really the main difference between these two are the blooms on this one aren't going to be impressive at all. For instance, I have a little bloom starting here. As you can see, it's basically like nothing. This one has a little bloom as well. And you can just see that the bloom has not really got much going on as far as looks. So I would actually recommend just trimming them off unless you're looking to pollinate your plant, which you can do. You can collect the pollen off of the plant. It goes through two phases. The first one is the female phase where it has like a sticky substance on there and it's receptive to being pollinated. Then once it goes through that phase, it will actually go to the male phase where it has pollen that you can actually brush off the pollen with like a little paintbrush, and you can store it in like a little Ziploc bag, and you can save it for next time when your Anthurium blooms, and you can just brush that pollen during the first phase or the sticky female phase, and your Anthurium at that point would become pollinated, and it would actually create berries or seeds that you could at that point you could plant them and have some beautiful Anthurium plants. I'm going to talk a little bit about propagating, and that's one of the ways. The other way is by division. However, on the blooming Anthuriums like this one, or the ones that we most commonly see at the different plant shops, you want to keep the blooms on those plants, right? That's like the main appeal of those. So I'm going to share like how to kind of get those blooms to maintain. Also how to get your plant to bloom again, because Anthurium with the right conditions, especially the beautiful flowering Anthurium, they can probably flower year-round for you as long as you give them the right conditions. So in talking about blooms and how to get your beautiful Anthurium to rebloom and keep these plants happy, let's talk about lighting, because that's one of the important things to get right with these plants. It's in that Goldilocks zone of what we call bright and direct light. So I'd say that consists of bright morning light is fine because the UV is lower, just like for us. We're less likely to get sunburned in the morning versus in the afternoon with the higher UV rays. The same for our plants. And although in the afternoons, if there's still blasting light, you don't want this plant to be up against the window. Now, if you don't have a bright window in your home, like most of us don't, use a grow light.
I've had most of these under grow lights and they are doing awesome. We don't get much light here in Michigan. I think we get 60 days a year of sunlight without clouds. So grow lights have become my best friend, and there are lots of great options out there that are affordable, that don't look like grow lights. So I would definitely recommend exploring that. If your anthurium is not reblooming regularly and you have one of the blooming anthuriums, then, or flowering anthuriums, definitely give it more light. So this part is really interesting because anthuriums are actually semi-epiphytic, which means they enjoy air just as much as they enjoy soil. So you want to make sure that you're not overwatering your anthuriums. And this 100% comes down to the type of soil you're using. That's really the only way to prevent overwatering. It's not really how much water you put into the soil, it's how much of the moisture the soil is retaining. Anthurium can be sensitive to the type of water. If you have like hard water, if you have a lot of like chemicals or your water's very treated, anthurium can struggle with that. And you might see some things like this going on over here. You know, this could be bacterial, it could be lack of airflow, it could be, I don't think it's root rot, but it's probably to do with the water. So a lot of people recommend special like water conditioning drops. I have not tried that. If you have, please leave it in the comments for everybody. Rainwater is great. Distilled water is going to be your best friend. You want to make sure that the soil doesn't dry out too much. These plants really enjoy consistency. Again, they don't want to be oversaturated, which will come down to soil, but you want to give these guys a good drink when you do water them, and then you want to water them when it's about halfway dry. You don't want these to completely dry out. They also really enjoy high humidity. You can use a humidifier. You could also use like a pebble tray, a tray with some pebbles and some water, and as the water evaporates, it'll provide that plant with humidity. I've also seen some people using like sphagnum moss, and they'll moisten up the sphagnum moss and then they'll use it as like a top coating on the soil, and that will kind of like help keep the moisture in while still using well-draining soil mixture and just keep the roots with a good amount of humidity. So there are definitely tips and tricks you can do, but if you're seeing crisping, it's probably humidity issues. So like I said, anthurium are semi-epiphytic, which means they love air as much as they love soil. So you want to have a chunky mix, and you can easily make your own, or you can buy a custom potting mix. I definitely don't recommend just using a standard potting mix. It's just going to hold on to too much moisture, and your plant's going to have a way more likely occurrence of root rot, which is like the easiest way to kill your plant. I would recommend 50% potting mix to retain moisture and 50% other substrates. I would recommend putting some orchid bark in there. They just love orchid bark. Also some perlite or some pumice. But today I'm going to be using a Repot Me customized soil blend. And whether you use a customized soil blend or your own, these plants only need to be repotted every like two to 3 years because they don't mind being a little snug in their pots. So it's so worth it to invest in a really good soil mixture. That way you don't have to worry about your plant getting root rot for the next however many years. The other thing I would suggest, in addition to a really good soil blend, is our clear nursery pots, because you can keep an eye on the moisture, you can keep an eye on the roots, you can see how everything's going, if there's any issues. I just love these so much. You could use plastic, you can use terracotta if you're somebody who likes to water your plants a lot. The terracotta will wick away moisture. Like I said, I like the clear ones, and these have great drainage. So whatever pot you use, just make sure there's a lot of drainage. These are technically orchid pots, which I love because orchids are epiphytic, you know, and most of our tropical plants have some amount of epiphyticness that they like, especially the aeroids. They're like climbing up trees in their natural habitats. So these orchid, clear slotted orchid pots have airflow on the sides as well, which you just don't see that with other pots. Okay, so you want to go 1 to 2 inches bigger than the root ball. Sometimes these plants are potted up in pots that are way too big for them. And if a plant is sitting in a lot of soil, especially when you water it, those roots aren't going to be able to absorb up all that moisture, and it's just going to end up sitting in wet, soggy soil, which, as we know, causes root rot, which we don't want. So I always just pull the plant out, try to get some of the soil off, and then go by the root ball. So maybe a little bit bigger than that. Yeah, so this actually is like 1 to 2 inches bigger than the nursery pot. So I'm going to be using the Monstera soil from Repot Me. The reason I'm using Monstera soil is I've tried I think I've tried almost all their soils now. And the Monstera one is, I think, chunkier than the philodendron or the tropical. So this is what you want it to look like. There's like perlite, pumice, there's some orchid bark in there, there's activated charcoal. You see how it's really chunky? You could even go chunkier than this. You don't want to cover the crown of the plant, and the crown is really just the base of the plant where it goes from roots to plant. Okay, change of plans. This plant is very leggy and it's falling over, and it's just, even though the roots look good, I'm gonna chop it and prop it. I'm going to just take my shears, make sure they're clean, and I'm just gonna chop at the node. Great. So I just got some water. I made sure I didn't use tap water, I used distilled. So you want it to cover up the nodes, but you don't want it to come up so high on the plant. And eventually these will start to put out roots. And once it gets a good amount of roots, you can either pot it up in soil, or you can pot it up in leca or pond or something. If you want to continue growing it in, even in just water, you can. So next up is the crystallinum. And I've had this one growing in sphagnum moss. It hasn't even been growing in soil. And it was kind of an experiment that went decently well. My problem with the sphagnum moss, even though it's very airy and the roots love it, it just dries out so fast. I mean, in a day or two, it's dry. And I just can't keep up with that. So I'm going to put it in some chunky soil. And honestly, I think that's where some of these problems are coming from, is from the fact that this plant keeps getting dried out. And here's the thing. When we bring plants into our homes, I think we have these like ridiculously high expectations sometimes of like keeping the plant looking absolutely perfect. But these plants grow up in greenhouses that have the ideal pristine conditions, and our homes just don't have greenhouse conditions. So don't feel bad. If you're seeing this on your plant, that's all right. Maybe the next one will look better. You can adjust accordingly. The plants take a long time to adapt as well. So the old leaves might look kind of weird, but the new leaves will look better. If you see your old leaves are dying off, don't worry about it. I mean, definitely take precautions. Make sure there's not pests. Try to stay on top of watering. Might try and stay on top of lighting. Don't feel bad if your plants look like they live in your home and not in a greenhouse or a tropical rainforest. All right, I'm done with my tangent. So I don't see any root rot, which is awesome. The sphagnum moss has been great. If you don't mind watering your plants all the time, growing your Anthurium and sphagnum moss is a great trick. I did water this a couple days ago, so it's got some moisture left in it. I always recommend watering your plants a couple of days before you repot them. This just allows the roots to be hydrated, and you're less likely to tear at the roots. Look at those roots. I love it. Yep, that's a good size. Yep, this size up. Uh-oh, I don't think I'm gonna have enough pots. So I just realized that this is the largest pot size that I have left. I thought I had some more. So I'm going to just repot up this Veitchii. So you'd think I would have to water my plants more right now because it's the summertime, but I find I'm actually having to water my plants less often because we're not using all that dry heat and the humidity's higher. So just keep that in mind when you are watering your plants, that don't do it on like a schedule where you just know you're gonna water on this day every week, because it really varies depending on like temperature and season and humidity. But there you go. You wanna make sure that the crown of the plant is above the soil. After you've repotted your plants, you want to make sure to give them a good drink. You want to water from the top. And while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of pest management. So these are called systemic granules, and you sprinkle them into the top of the soil. And what happens is it makes the plant toxic to pests. I always like to put in some systemic granules into any plant that I bring home, and it helps to prevent mealybugs, thrips, aphids, fungus gnats. It works for fungus gnats as well. The only one that I find it doesn't work for are spider mites. For spider mites, I recommend insecticidal soap. Doesn't matter what brand. And for insecticidal soap, you just spray the leaves. This also gets rid of like mealybugs and thrips and really all the pests. So those two products are like a winning combination in my opinion. It doesn't matter how much I water this plant, it's only going to absorb so much moisture because the soil is so well draining. And you can see with the clear pot where it's like missing moisture. So yeah, you just want to give it a good drink. Don't be afraid to give it too much water because now that you have a well-draining soil mixture, that's a non-issue. The only thing you don't want to do though is let it sit in water. Like if this was in a cover pot and you watered it, it would drain out the bottom, but then it would sit in the cover pot and then your plant would be in trouble. However, I'm gonna let this sit for just like maybe 15-20 minutes, absorb a little bit from the bottom as well, just so it gets like kind of evenly moist throughout. And then I'm gonna take any of the excess water in this saucer and I'm going to dump it out because we do not want our plants sitting in water ever. Let's do the same thing for our little veitchii here. So cute. And watering it from the top, especially, oh, forgot my systemic granules. Just helps the plant like settle into the pot, you know? See how well draining that is? Music to my ears. We're just gonna let that sit in that water for a few minutes again, just like this one. Allow it to absorb some moisture from the bottom. And then after about 15-20 minutes, I'm just gonna dump out all that excess water. And then they should be good to go for, I don't know, we'll see how long it takes for them to be about halfway dry. Again, with the cover pots, it's like nursery pots, it's easy to tell if they're drying out. Now these two plants were very root bound, which is the perfect time to repot, and that's usually in the spring. So if you see the roots are coming out the top, the bottom, that's the perfect time to repot. Another good time to repot, even if it's been a couple of years and it's not necessarily root bound, it's a good idea because the soil will not be as good at holding on to moisture. It won't be as good as holding on to nutrients. It could have developed where it's holding on to too many minerals. So just give it a good refresh, give it a good repot no matter what every couple of years, and your plant will thank you for it. I talked a bit about humidity already, but for temperature, the rule goes with all of these tropical plants. They like warm weather, they don't like to be very cold. So as long as you're comfortable in your home, your plant will be too. Fertilizing is a very good idea for your anthurium. You can use one that's for houseplants. You can use one that is bloom inducing if you want, if you're using it on one of your flowering anthuriums. I wouldn't use a bloom inducing one on one of your foliage anthurium because you're really not trying to get it to bloom. But fertilizing is important because they're limited to the nutrients in their pot, and these are plants, you know, that are heavy foliage plants, so they will want a good fertilizing. And I would say start in the springtime when we're in the beginning of the growing season. Start at half strength to kind of wake your plant up, get it used to some fertilizing, and as long as it responds well, then go to full strength all through the growing months and then start to taper off in the fall. Most tropical plants prefer not to be fertilized in the winter months because they actually go dormant, and that's when you'll see they'll like get rid of their old leaves. They'll start to push all their energy into their root systems and you won't see much new growth happening. But then come springtime, we'll bounce right back into the growing months and back into fertilizing. So some common issues to look out for, and some of these I've talked about already, but one of the first ones are browning tips on the leaves. This is usually from low humidity or mineral heavy water. So yellowing leaves, this could be due to poor drainage, which you want to have a pot with a good amount of drainage and also a well-draining soil mixture. And if you have a flowering anthurium and you're not seeing any blooms or flowers coming back, you'll want to give your plant more light and also make sure you're fertilizing. I always like to mention if a houseplant is pet safe or not. And unfortunately, anthurium are not pet safe. They are toxic, although they're not fatal, but you're more likely, if your animal chews on it, to get like a gastrointestinal upset. I briefly mentioned that one of the ways you can propagate an anthurium is through pollinating the blooms on the flower and getting berries, which then you get seeds from that. That's a very long, drawn out process. Really, the only other way that I know of to propagate anthurium is by division. So for example, this plant right here, I could just cut it right down the center and make sure that both sides have roots, and that would be fine. A lot of times Anthurium will also like put off little pups similar to snake plants and a lot of other tropical plants, and if they do that, they're super easy to divide. But when you're doing that, you just want to make sure however many plants that you end up with each have their own like root system attached. So like I said, Anthurium may look like they're high maintenance and exotic and difficult to care for, but they're really not, as long as you know a few key things. Bright and direct light, a chunky soil mixture, not using tap water that has a lot of minerals in it or is too hard, and if you want, upping the humidity a little bit and your Anthurium will be good to go. Let me know in the comments if you're team flowering Anthurium or if you are team foliage Anthurium. I don't know, I think I might be team foliage Anthurium, but I've been seeing some really, really beautiful flowering Anthurium lately, and I think I could be easily persuaded to be both. It's hard for me to choose. I'm not a favorites girl. I love them all. But yeah, leave in the comments any like tips and tricks that you have for your Anthurium. I know a lot of people will also use like leca and pon instead of soil. There's lots of great options out there if you want to do some research on that. Again, let us know in the comments what works best for you. And if you want to see more planty videos in your newsfeed, definitely subscribe. Always good planty vibes. And we have a great community on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. All right, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and that I get to see you soon. Bye.